What does this mean to me as a woman and a survivor? It means we acknowledge that violence against women and girls happens and the rate at which it happens. It means we acknowledge that this violence doesn't occur in a vacuum. It means we all do everything we can to prevent it and to support victims. It also means we listen to survivors. Violence against women and girls is a massive problem. Approximately 85,000 women are raped in England and Wales every year, and at least 1 in 4 women experience domestic violence in their lifetime. Violence against women and girls occurs in a context where there is a power imbalance between men and women, where victims are often ignored, disbelieved, judged and blamed, where the media is often sympathetic to perpetrators, where most violence against women and girls isn't reported to police and much less results in prosecution or conviction, where people have very little understanding of the process of grooming and the impact of trauma on victims, where porn which objectifies women and girls and normalises violence and abuse is increasingly accessed by men and boys. I learnt about porn from the things perpetrators did. This violence happens in the context of a victim-blaming culture. When I was a vulnerable 14-year-old, I described breaking out of a locked house after being raped to a support worker. She told me that this is what men will do if you take those risks. When I told another professional that a girl I used to hang about with had been murdered by her stepdad, she wanted to do a role play, which involved blaming the victim for opening her door to the man who murdered her. I also had friends who blamed me and distanced themselves from me to reassure themselves that this was something that happened to other girls, not them. Violence against women and girls happens in a context where media uses language like child prostitutes to describe girls who've been exploited, and unhappy and homesick to describe a man who murdered a woman. Some newspapers choose not to give a voice to victims, but instead quote perpetrators who are blaming their victims. Many women are afraid to report violence to the police. I reported a rape to the police not long after my 14th birthday. The process was horrendous and there was no prosecution or conviction despite my age and DNA evidence. I thought if it did go to court I wouldn't be believed or would be blamed. I was also frightened my mental health struggles would mean I was seen as an unreliable witness, instead of being recognised as a response to trauma. I was frightened that the fact I had been repeatedly victimised would be used against me. We're at a real time of change. Since Jimmy Savile, there's been a lot more in the media about sexual violence. Increased reporting to police and increased accessing of support services. These are very positive steps, but we need to build on them. Some recent reporting and dramas like Three Girls have been good, although very difficult to watch. However, victim blaming still happens. Only in February this year, an article was published in the UK which suggested that women who say no to sex with their husbands are responsible for their husbands committing sexual assault. It's great there's more reporting to police and that prosecutions are increasing, but convictions have actually dropped as a percentage of reports. The legal system has some catching up to do. We have an inquiry into child sexual abuse taking place, which is positive. However, a large survivors group has felt the need to withdraw from this due to feeling unheard, concerns of an organisational cover-up, issues with multiple resignations and lack of transparency. There has been an increase in women trying to access support services, but no increase in funding for these services. Last year, 58,000 individuals received an ongoing rape crisis service, which is an increase of 16% since 2014-15, yet most women in the UK do not have access to a rape crisis centre. I would like to think that the investigations into Jimmy Savile and the various grooming gangs will be a catalyst for change. I would like to see continuing increased reporting of offences, but with an increase in prosecution and convictions of perpetrators. This could be supported by training of police and CPS, and a greater representation of women in high levels of the criminal justice system. I would also like to see increased education and awareness around domestic abuse and sexual violence for everyone. This should include increased understanding of impact of power imbalances. I would like to see more representation of women and survivors in media. I would like an end to media that objectifies women or treats them as worth less than men, as this is on the continuum of violence against women. I would like the government to commit to long-term funding for services for survivors to ensure that increased reporting of violence is matched by increased resources for support and advocacy. We all have a responsibility to do something if we see something, to not turn the other way. We can all have an impact. I would like all of us to listen to and hear survivors. I would like us all to be able to recognise victim blaming when we see it and to challenge it. I would like us all to understand about grooming, repeated victimisation and the impact of trauma. I would like us all to be clear that violence is always the fault of the perpetrator.